You're watching Shalom TV, celebrating all things Jewish.
I want to put it right out in the beginning. I love the book. I read it and admired it, and so I want to put that in this context. But how'd you come up with the idea of doing a new Haggadah, particularly since you know how many Haggadahs there are?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm very, very happy to be here. I've spoken now about this Haggadah in a number of places, a number of different kinds of contexts, at the Writers Guild Theater in LA, at a couple of college campuses. And now that I have returned to New York, I live in Brooklyn, I'm now sort of peeled away a layer and into the more deeply explicit Jewish scene, speaking in synagogues. I was at the Jewish Theological Seminary earlier. And it's very exciting. Both kinds of conversations are exciting. It's exciting to talk to people who have very little experience with, very little exposure to Jewish ritual. And of course, it's very exciting talking to people where the starting point is fairly advanced, where there are already a lot of shared references, a lot of shared experiences, not to mention shared aspirations. So how did I get the idea to work on this? As you're saying, it's not, as you gestured at, it's not an original idea at all. In fact, it's pretty much the least original idea for a maker of books to have, in the sense that there's no book that has been revisited more times than the Haggadah, across cultures. I don't mean Jewish book. I don't mean ritualistic book. Of all books that have ever been created in human history, no book has been revised more times than the Haggadah has.
Maybe that's why you did it.
So, I mean, the question is...
out.
The question is, why does everybody want to do it? Not why did I want to do it?
Yeah, why does everyone want to do it?
Why does everybody want to do it? There are different reasons. One is, it's one of the most awe-inspiring stories ever told. It's one of the oldest continually told stories. It may be the most well-known story across cultures. Not everybody on the street knows what an afikomen is, but everybody knows what the 10 plagues are. So, as a writer, as somebody who likes books, as somebody who likes stories, and by the way, this is something I have in common with my 6-year-old son, the story of the Exodus is amazing. I think it's amazing, and the more time I could spend with it, the happier I would be. I also approached it because of some very personal reasons. I've been attending Seders all of my life. I've been to, I guess it would be 68 now.
We can do the math.
Yeah.
34.
The first one was always at my parents' house in D.C. It started in our dining room when it was just my older brother and me and my parents. And as the family expanded and as the Seder became more inclusive, growing to include aunts, uncles, cousins, visiting family, teachers from our school, we moved it to the basement. And our one table became many tables pushed together. The ping pong table, the bumper pool table, the card tables, just to try to accommodate all these people. I always knew it was Passover season because my dad would ask me to take the net off the ping pong table. And then the second Seder was always at my grandmother's house. So at the first Seder, we used a Haggadah that my parents cobbled together from other Haggadot and from online resources when that became something people did. And the joke was always, why is this night different from all other nights? Because on this night, copyright doesn't apply. And that was a very...
From a family of writers, that's really a...
Yeah, well, we really weren't all writers until somewhat recently. But it was a very invigorating Seder. My dad would give homework assignments to people before they came. You know, I want you all to think about a time this year when you witnessed something that was unjust and didn't intervene. How does that make you feel? Come with a specific example. We're going to talk about it. The second Seder at my grandmother's house was much more ritualistic. We used the Maxwell House Haggadah. It's really funny.
Like the president, apparently.
I just wrote an op-ed for the Times. It's going to be in Sunday about the Maxwell House Haggadah and what I call Maxwell House Jewry. And it's funny how the mere mention of it elicits laughter. I have never, and I've now mentioned it a number of times, I've never mentioned it without laughter coming back. And it's curious why we laugh. What exactly is funny about it, particularly when it is not only the most used Haggadah, it is used more than all others combined. It is still, yeah. There are 50 million of them that have been printed, and they print about 1 million every year. Wow. So I wonder if the source of the laughter isn't really a kind of anxiety, you know, a suspicion that we have that maybe we could be doing a lot better. But that's beside the point. So the two Seders that we had were always really wonderful in very different ways. And I always looked forward to them. I enjoyed them. They created lots of really great memories. But neither felt like a fulfillment of the Seder's promise. I never felt like my family was arriving at the conversation, the level, the depth of the conversation that was possible and that we craved. You know, my family, like most families probably, there was only twice a year, consecutive nights, when we would gather to discuss the really big themes, not only slavery and freedom, but who we are as individuals, as a family, as a people, what the distance is between who we are and who we want to be, who we imagined ourselves to be. And so it's an amazing opportunity. And even as a child, I recognized that opportunity, and I also recognized that it wasn't realized. So, you know, the Seder is very much constrained by the Haggadah, especially for I would say, Jews of my generation, in the sense that we have much less Jewish literacy than, for example, my grandparents had. We depend on the guidebook more, I think, than previous generations have. And so I began to wonder what would be the best kind of guidebook. You know, what would contextualize this event? What would make us feel engaged with the story? And maybe most importantly, what would encourage us to take this empathic leap that the Haggadah asks for, which is to feel as if, you know, we at the table are ourselves presently being liberated from Egypt. It's a miraculous demand asked of a reader, and it's really inspiring, and I had never experienced it. And so I wondered what might possibly bring that about, so I started to think about it.
You put that as the quote on the cover of the Haggadah, but you put it on the cover only in Hebrew.
Right.
Why is that?
So
if you look at the cover of the book, you can see that it has a Hebrew quote on it, and the quote is, "In every generation, a person is obligated to view himself as if he were the one who went out from Egypt, and it is said, on that day, tell your sons, saying, for this purpose the Lord labored on my behalf by taking me out of Egypt." So I'm just interested why you chose that phrase.
Well, to me, so there are two questions: why that phrase, and why only Hebrew. Right. That phrase, because it's the sort of it captures so much of the flavor of the Seder and of the Haggadah, both the generational transmission. You know, in every generation, Jews have been telling this story for more than 100 generations, and yet when it is told in its ideal form, we are only one generation. You know, the book becomes a kind of time machine, where, in fact, in that phrase, you know, generation is used in the singular. We are with all Jews everywhere simultaneously. I mean, one of the most amazing things about the Seder, and I'm sure everybody has experienced this, is that sudden awareness that, oh my God, millions of Jews are doing the exact same thing that I am doing at this exact moment. And not just Jews on the Upper West Side.
I live in the Upper West Side.
But, you know, Jews, until quite recently in Ethiopia, Jews in Russia, Jews in South America, Jews in China. And the awareness that we are conduits or the carriers of the voice of all of the Jews that came before us to all of the Jews that will come after us. That, you know, this is our moment in this link, in this chronology. And
you put a timeline on the side of the book. That was the attempt on the timeline.
That's exactly right. So there's a timeline that runs graphically across the top of the book, which kind of tells the story of the story, how the telling of the Exodus from Egypt
I'm showing.
has been present throughout Jewish history and world history, and not only as a kind of it is not only of historical interest, it is also, I think, of very personal interest in that one recognizes one's place on the timeline. You know, the timeline doesn't end in the book with a date. It continues through a series of blank pages where one is encouraged to write his or her name, the place of the Seder, the date, and a couple memories. As I was working on this Haggadah, I asked people about their family traditions. And that came up a number of times, never in any formalized way, but people would, in the back cover, the inside cover of the family Haggadah, they would just write their name and the year, so that it became a kind of living record of the use of the book and a record of the family's celebrations or observances. So by having the timeline end in that way, I wanted to just accentuate that idea, highlight that idea that we are in this book as well. You know, that the Haggadah is not intended only to be recited or only to be received, but to be really embodied. You know, that a successful Seder is one in which people around the table feel like characters in the story that they're telling.
When you say that we're in the Haggadah as well, you in some ways you mean Americans. You called it the New American Haggadah. I think you note in the introduction that it's just where it's published, right? If you think about Haggadahs, they often get the name of where they're published, the Regensburg Haggadah, the Vienna Haggadah, like that. And so this is the American. But it is a strongly American Haggadah. And I think Jeffrey Goldberg, one of your commentators, even says, we don't feel in exile here. We don't, for the first time maybe in Jewish history, we live in a diaspora where we don't feel in exile, and that must shade the whole experience of the Haggadah. Do you think this is time for a different Haggadah because it's America, because it's a most hospitable place for us to live?
I do. In a way, there's two questions. I mean, I don't think of it as being exclusively or even really preferentially American. All of the writers are American. The designer happens to be Israeli. But I don't think that whatever American quality it has would forbid access to people who aren't American. As you put it correctly, it's called the New American in this tradition of naming Haggadot after either where they were made or where they became of historical importance, like the Sarajevo Haggadah. But we are at an interesting moment in American Jewry. You know, we have undergone our own kind of exodus from cities into suburbs, from struggle into affluence, from tradition to modernity, from familiarity, from Jewish literacy to a kind of estrangement and a kind of ignorance. And I say this not with a wagging finger, but pointing at myself. You know, I went to Hebrew school for 15 years. I was bar mitzvahed. I've been to Israel many times.
Did you actually learn Hebrew in Hebrew school?
Like a lot of American Jews, I learned how to read it without knowing what it meant.
I think for all that Hebrew school, we could have gotten a little further, but
you would think so. I mean, it's not a joke. It's a very, very serious thing. I mean, we're making sure that our kids learn it in a way that we didn't learn it. But what's my point? When I was working on this Haggadah, I had to confront my own ignorance. And it was a very humbling thing. And I also had to confront the longing that I had not to be ignorant. You know, the thrill that I would feel when I would meet somebody who was fluent and profound. And so, you know, the question is, what has this fluency and profundity been replaced by? What is it that Jews of my generation have as their primary relation to their Jewish identity? And I think a lot of it is laughter, and not a good kind of laughter. an ironic kind of laughter, a kitschy kind of laughter. You know, I love Larry David, Curb Your Enthusiasm, but there's a problem when he becomes a referent, you know, for one's Jewish identity.
Arbiter.
Yeah. And so I began, you know, to wonder, what is it that I crave? Because I knew I didn't crave ritualistic observance, at least not for its own sake. I actually am interested in it to some extent, but my ideal was not to come closer to religiosity in the sense of observance, but in the sense of seeking myself, you know, learning about my history, and partaking in the continuation of it. And the only way that I could think to do that was by reading. So as I started to put this Haggadah together, I wrote to a number of people. I believe I wrote to you. And I asked for any number of different kinds of help. In the last 3 or 4 years, I would just ask for reading lists. You know, what are 20 books that any Jew who takes Jewish thought seriously should read? And it became a kind of joke in our house as these books would, you know, arrive in the mail, and they would have increasingly, unlikely titles. You know, we'd rip open the package and it would say, you know, Hasids on Fire, Prayer in the mid-16th Century, whatever it was.
That's actually a really good book.
Yeah.
I read that book.
Yeah. And they would, I think I did actually almost get the title right, but these started to replace the novels on my...
The Prayer, I think, was on fire, not the Chassidim, but
maybe,
it was
right.
basically used.
Right, that's exactly right. Little book, blue cover.
Sometimes the Chassidim were on fire, but not voluntarily.
I think also, though, didn't Elie Wiesel write a book about someone on fire?
He wrote a book called Souls on Fire.
Souls on Fire, so that's also close to that.
Yeah,
but that's not the book I was talking about.
Passionate and flaming, not actual fire.
So one of the interesting things to me was, or one of the great things, was not only that it really did activate this latent curiosity or longing, but it also made me fall in love with books again. You know, I had been at this point a novelist, a professional novelist for 5 years, 6 years, something like that, 7 years. And it had become impossible for me to read a book on its own terms and for its own sake. There was always the confusion of being a professional and wanting to learn a craft as opposed to, as I said, doing it for its own sake. And these books I really was reading on their own terms, and the reading was done with a kind of pureness of intention that I hadn't had in a while, and it was very exciting. I mean, I haven't done anything that has helped me with fiction as much as working on this project did.
You know, I always think of the Passover Haggadah as kind of like an opera, you know, and it has many opera feels to it, you know, more than one person is often talking at once, you know, and people are falling asleep and sometimes walking out and peeking, you know, as Lemony Snicket says, peeking to see if the food is actually ready. But you edited this, so I'm interested to know where your voice is in this. You don't, except for the short introduction, you don't have a byline in this.
Well, it was a balancing act in making the book to try to make a book, a Haggadah that didn't have the strong sensibility of its creators. When I started working on this book, and this is about 8, 9 years ago, I wrote to the writers I most admired and the artists I most admired, and I asked if they wanted to participate. I think they all said yes, actually. And I started to get work. And I got really wonderful writing and really wonderful art. But I was accidentally making an anthology rather than a functioning Haggadah. And I realized that one of the problems was the sensibility of the creators. It was just too strong. It ended up feeling like text boxes in the margins of the page, or drawing attention away from the page. And you know, I realized in retrospect that I was accidentally leading with the idea that making a new Haggadah would be an act of self-expression rather than Haggadah expression. You know, just trying to figure out what this book is and illuminate it. Tune the instrument in such a way that people alive now could sing along to extend your metaphor. So I ended up not using 25, 30 pieces, including ones that I wrote. The kill fees for the book were larger than the fees for pieces that went in. It was a very awkward process, a very inefficient process, but I'm glad that the book found the form that it did.
I think the book is beautiful and beautifully translated. It was translated by Nathan Englander, who's really a wonderful writer. I know he's been a little attacked for the, I suppose, infidelity of the translation. I admire the translation. I thought maybe ask you to read one of them.
Sure.
One of the most beautiful ones is the playbill, which is the order of the Seder in the beginning.
Right.
And
I should say he's been, I mean, you know, nothing is good for the Jews, right? There's so many different kinds of Jews that nothing is going to appeal to all of them.
Thank God.
And any effort to appeal to all of them is not only silly, it's probably even goyish.
That's
so
right. Probably.
we,
in the Lenny Bruce sense of,
yeah.
you know, yeah.
So Nathan, you know, some people say it's too literal. Other people say it's not literal enough. I have been shocked by how consistently generous the reception has been, actually. I thought it was going to be much more divisive just because of the nature of, you know, a ritualistic document. But, no, it's been,
Well,
you know.
it is the first translation that tried to put an American voice into it, which is, and it's actually it's an interpretive translation. I think it's fair. There's some things that feel embarrassing, you know, instead of pour out your wrath, it says shed your wrath. Instead of saying, you know, he destroyed the Jews, he says he disappeared the Jews. I mean, those are they're fascinating. They're interesting. But it does have a real, you know, American voice to it. You know, which is kind of striking. And it's, as you say, it's not the last Haggadah, and it's not the only Haggadah you can have on your table. It's one of the Haggadahs. So I embraced it. Anyway, maybe I'll let you read
So this is the Kadesh Orchatz, read that?
Kadesh Orchatz, yeah.
So,
if people remember, in the beginning of the Seder, mostly you read the Kiddush, you know, they'll list the parts, right? 15 steps in the Kiddush, they'll say. The Kiddush, the hand washing, and like that. But it's been rendered beautifully, I think.
he wanted to, you know, Nathan, his strategy was always to, I should say a bit about his background. He grew up in an Orthodox family, and when I asked him to think about translating the book, his first response was, I didn't even know there was English. I mean, he never looked, he had never looked at the English because they always did it all in Hebrew, which was great because he really could approach it with a kind of freshness that, you know, a more jaded translator couldn't, but also, you know, the depth and breadth of his knowledge of Hebrew is really impressive. So, let us sanctify and wash, dip, split, and tell, be washed and bless the poor man's bread, bitter, bundle, and settle down to eat, hide it and bless, praise it, and be pleased. So, you know, it's a slightly odd construction because it's like the table of contents for the Seder. It's not, there are very lyrical passages in here, things that feel like poetry, some passages that feel like they could be out of a novel. But this is the kind of operatic, you know, opening to the festivities.
It says that Nathan Englander in the very back of the book says that he wrote or he translated most of it with Chavruta, which is a study partner. When I study with lots of people in this room, and we almost all study as partners, you know, in that way. Does that have an impact on the book, you think? Did that, I mean, maybe you also studied as in partnership.
Well, first Nathan studied with a young man named Baruch Thaler, who came from Lubavitch community in Crown Heights, and since has gone secular, or whatever the term is, and is truly
returning to questions.
Right. He is he's just a bona fide genius. I mean, he knows the Haggadah by heart. We never had to reference the Hebrew because he knows the Hebrew, you know, letter by letter, and but also has just an incredible sensitivity, not only to the nuances of Hebrew, but the nuances of English. And they studied together. And then once, this was Nathan thought the project would take him 3 months, 4 months. It took him 3 years. And then he and I wrestled with the translation, the English. I was reading it as an English reader. So the whole, Nathan's experience was emblematic of the larger experience with the book, which is it ended up taking up a lot more space, time, and energy than any of us would have thought. Our ambition never changed, but our investment in it did. It really deepened.
Well, say something more about that.
Well, the ambition was always to make a Haggadah that would work for our families. So it's a strange ambition because we have very different families. Nathan's sister is quite Orthodox, and it was important to him that she and her family be able to use this. I grew up in a conservative family. I went to a conservative shul in D.C., and we are flexible Jews, let me put it that way. So for me, what was more important than, whereas when he thought about her, he thought about liturgical choices. When I thought about my family, I thought about the kinds of conversations that would be stimulated, the pacing of the book, both the text and the design, which I hope we get a chance to talk about a little more. So, as I was saying before, nothing is good for the Jews. I was making a joke. We never thought about the Jewish community when we were making the book, in the sense of the reception of the book. I think it's actually a terrible mistake too, because you create something based on assumptions of others, generalities, rather than your own sense of what's authentic, what's moving, what's inspiring, what's funny, what's engaging. So it's been really, really interesting to see how the book has gone out into the world. The publisher, suspected it would just kind of be a weird book that maybe did okay and sort of disappeared. And frankly, I wasn't sure that they were wrong about that. I didn't know.
Got on the Colbert Show.
Well, the week it came out, believe it or not, it sold more copies than any book in America except for The Hunger Games, which is, The Hunger Games. Hunger Games has full-page ads on the sides of buses, very, very broad appeal. We had at that point one advertisement that was bartered for books in Moment magazine. That was the marketing campaign.
Well, Moment magazine's big,
Yeah, it's obviously. This is what we have all come to terms with, is that Moment magazine drives American culture. And the book sold out, and they reprinted and it sold out. They've now done 6. They've gone back to press 6 times. And it's going to run out again, and they're not going to be able to get it back in time for Passover, unfortunately. But the nice thing about Seders is there's always next year. So it's been interesting to see how different communities have engaged with the book, responded to it. I've been frankly surprised by the embrace of the modern Orthodox community. Frankly, what criticisms we've had have come almost entirely from the Reform movement, and they've been really limited. I mean, the singular complaint really is that it's not egalitarian. And
why is it not egalitarian?
It's not egalitarian because Nathan felt that if we weren't going to change the Hebrew, we shouldn't change the English. That it should be, the fact that it's 4 sons instead of 4 sons and daughters is something we should talk about. It is a problem. But it's not a problem for the translator to solve. It's a problem for families to solve. There's certain work that's done at the translator's desk, and there's certain work that's done at the Seder table. The Seder table is the site of work. It's the site of hard conversations, difficult conversations, the unwinding of problems. The Haggadah, gives us lots of material to be proud of and inspired by, and some material that's really difficult, that we have to wrestle with. The 10th plague is difficult. The notion that we would kill every single firstborn, that is something that most Jews I know, for most Jews I know, it requires an explanation. It requires thought. Maybe it requires even questioning the judgment of it, if you think of such things in terms of judgment. So what makes the book so alive is how fraught it is, how difficult the questions it poses are. If they were easy questions, we would have finished with it a long time ago. but it's sustained itself for more than 3,000 years. So it's not at all the case that we didn't think about this. Nathan and I wrestled with this decision, like many other decisions in the book, but we felt like the room in which we were having the conversation was not the appropriate place to alter a 3,000-year-old document, that it would be much more productive and appropriate for it to happen at the table.
What do you think about the design?
What do I think about the design?
Even, and maybe to be sharper about it, even the design on the plagues. You designed the page on the plagues is words. You know, one of the favorite things, parts of a Haggadah is to, paint the plagues, and you just have, calligraphy, and then the text you put small, almost embarrassed. I mean, I think it is actually embarrassed.
I think it's the same size as everywhere else. We didn't really mess with the font size. The only place we made it bigger is at Next Year in Jerusalem at the end, but otherwise it's pretty consistent throughout.
Well,
to my knowledge,
it swims on the page, I think.
Right.
Because it's a double page. There aren't that many in the book.
It's not the sort of Maxwell House approach of like, pay attention, these are bold words in slightly larger font.
No pictures of frogs.
Right.
No hail.
To my knowledge, it's the only visually embellished Haggadah that is not figurative. There are no photographs, there are no drawings of characters or scenes. It's entirely text generated, the design. Text, it leads with the words. Why did we do that? For a few reasons. One, I think it's a very Jewish idea, the idea of leading with words. Words being generative. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. There wasn't a magic wand. There wasn't any abracadabra. The words brought it into being. The utterance brought it into being. It's the same thing with, you are married when you say, "I am married." We say, "I do," saying it in front of your community. And if you believe in God, saying it in front of your God. So putting the emphasis on the story and on the language felt really appropriate. But also, I wanted to, as I said earlier, remove the sensibility of the creator. When I was first working on this, I was in touch with the painter R.B. Katai, Maurice Sendak, Barry Blitt, all kinds of great people who would have made an absolutely beautiful Haggadah. The problem is it would have been theirs. One of the most beautiful Haggadot ever created was the Ben Shon Haggadah. The problem is it's the Ben Shon Haggadah. It's not the Haggadah that was by Ben Shon. It is entirely his sensibility that it leads with. And it's really a work of fine art rather than a fine Haggadah. So how do you remove... here's the question that the designer and the writers wrestled with. How do you make your best work without it being your work? And so we thought if we were to remove as much as possible the hand of the artist, or at least channel it through the words, this might be a way of getting at it. And then Oded, the designer, had this really ingenious idea, which was to have the design follow the history of Hebrew lettering. So what he did was, on every page, there's this timeline, as we said. He would look at the date. So, for example, 722 BCE. Go back through books, historical records, find how Jews wrote in that period, what the alphabet looked like. The alphabet has changed over time. Handwriting has changed. Once type was created, type then developed. And he would use the handwriting or the type of that period as the basis for his design on each page. So the book becomes a kind of living record of Hebrew lettering. It further contextualizes the book. It adds another layer of meaning without forbidding access. I think the most important thing a Haggadah can do is create space for the reader, for the user. Allow room for interpretation and conversation. The most famous Seder, well, I don't know if it's the most famous, perhaps the model Seder is one that actually appears in the Haggadah itself, which was in Bnei Barak when the five of Judaism, the great sages of antiquity, sat and told the story of the Exodus, it says, until a student of theirs interrupted them in the morning. The next morning it said, it's time to go say the Shema, it's time for morning prayers. So the question is, what were they doing? If you were to recite every word of this book, if you were to sing every verse of every song, fulfill every ritual act, still they would have been spending most of their time doing something else. So what is the something else? The something else is talking, conversing, wrestling with the story, trying to figure it out, dissecting it, extrapolating, trying to find meaning and new meaning in an ancient story. And so that's what the Haggadah's business is to create room for that kind of conversation. So it's a balancing act because you need to inspire and excite, but not prescribe or over-direct.
I mean, that Seder, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva, I call them the one-name rabbis, the famous guys.
Right.
And Elazar ben Azariah, a younger guy. I think they were writing the Seder. It's the first Seder. That's why they put it in prime time before the brisket gets.
Well, I mean,
You have to check too often.
it's interesting that that we have it's a kind of postmodern moment to have a Seder inside the telling of the Seder. And to me, I always thought of it as the moment that gives license to revise the book. Clearly, this book has been revised to include them, unless there really was nothing like any kind of Seder ritual, which is not the case. And they were, at the time, making it up from scratch. The notion that, or unless there was some kind of crazy gymnastics going on where at their Seder they were telling the story of themselves, which doesn't make any sense. So, to return to the question in the beginning about why would I work on it, why have a lot of people worked on it, I think it's a book that invites this kind of visitation in a way that other ritualistic Jewish books don't. The notion of a new edition of Genesis. I mean, you could retranslate it, but it would feel very hubristic, at least. Whereas I think one can engage with the Haggadah with humility, wanting to participate in this long conversation of how can this retelling be most alive to us.
What's your favorite part of it? And maybe read a piece of it.
What is my favorite part of it? I have a lot of favorite parts. I guess my favorite parts tend to be the ones that are most problematic, most fraught. I just find them exciting. I like thinking about them. I like wondering what people I admire would think about them. I like thinking about the conversations that our family will have at the Seder table. So the 10th plague is a good example. How do we make sense of it? How do we, with kids, make sense of it? The notion that a kind of communal judgment is passed on on a population that obviously there were Egyptians who were not guilty. Obviously there were Egyptians who probably wanted Jews to be free, and yet their kids were killed too. Not only were their kids killed, but their kids were killed after God hardened the Pharaoh's heart. It's very problematic. So we can, turn away from it. We could pretend it isn't there. We could change it in translation to make it more accessible or easy to swallow. Or we can say, here's what we have. This is this document that's more than 3,000 years old. Our parents and their parents and their parents, until you run out of breath, have looked at this story, have examined it. So what meaning can we find in it? And how can we apply that meaning to our lives? One of the things that's so exciting about the Haggadah is how it is not a mental exercise. It's not just an interesting conversation. It is intended to guide our lives, to bring us closer to that metaphorical Jerusalem of next year, to the world with no slaves of any kind anywhere.
You write Lemony Snicket writes, not fair, right? I mean, he writes, you can see it. He says, it is likely that the entire Egyptian nation disagreed with the Pharaoh by that time, and yet it was the entire nation that was punished. This is not fair.
Well, I mean, he's writing, I should say a little bit about how these four voices work.
Yeah.
There are four voices, commenting voices working throughout the book, and each comments on the sort of pivotal moments of the Seder, the moments when most people look up and say, what was that? We should talk about that. So one of the voices is Jeffrey Goldberg, who writes a commentary we called Nation, and it is sort of what are the political questions raised here that the Jewish people should be thinking about. There's Nathaniel Deutsch, who wrote what's called House of Study, which takes a more traditional rabbinic Jewish philosophical approach. Rebecca Neuberger Goldstein writes a commentary we called Library, which examines the story as a story. You know, why are the characters doing what they do here? What are their motives? What are their desires? And what do those have to do with us? And then Lemony Snicket, who's writing for kids, writing for young adults, maybe people aged 6 to 20, I don't know, something like that.
I thought it was for me, but...
Yeah, a lot of adults do, and that's fine.
Most Haggadahs don't have any humor in them at all, and this one has a lot of humor.
Right,
and
he very much leads with whimsy. So, you know, there were a couple of moments when I was editing his work, and I said, God, I don't know. Is this an appropriate place to be funny? Or you know, is this really the way to say this? And he said, I really know my audience. You know, basically, you know, the guy has sold like 60 million books. Like, he really does know his audience. When I was thinking about who could do this voice, it was actually impossible to conceive of anybody else. If he had said no, I don't know what I would have done. But fortunately, he said, yeah, well, Shel Silverstein is dead. So that's not helpful to either of us.
I have to say that Stephen Colbert did say that the Haggadah is kind of a series of unfortunate events,
right.
Which was a... and I do think that the Lemony Snicket, Dan Handler, is a guy I've known for a long time, his comment on Haggadah about the goats, maybe even you want to read
Sure.
that. It's, well, it's, of course, at the very end.
Yep.
So it's easy to find it.
Okay, I should say it's so much better when he reads it because he's just a really flamboyant ham. And like, I did a couple events with him in California and he just had people going crazy. Haggadah begins with one little goat. Oops, that was the wrong one. That wouldn't have been funny at all. Someone's father purchases a goat, and this goat starts a cavalcade of anguish and gluttony with animals, objects, people, and supernatural beings all dragged into the all-consuming whirlpool of the song. The entire universe changes, and it's all because of one goat. And it's been this way since the beginning of time, in every story that's ever been told. In the story of Passover, for example, if Moses had not been rescued from his basket in the reeds, the Jewish people might still be slaves in Egypt, so the infant Moses can be said to be a goat. If your parents had never met, then there might be an uglier, crueler person sitting at the Passover table instead of your own charming self, so your parents are goats. Every person in the world and every action each person takes is a goat, accumulating cats and dogs and staffs and fires and all of the joy and terror that makes up the stuff of the universe. You are a goat. And when you wake up in the morning, that is a goat. And eating breakfast is a goat. And all the goats all over the world are goating and goating and goating, all the time wondering if the goat they are and the goats they are goating are the right goat or the wrong goat, which is why the world often seems as stubborn as a goat, as ravenous as a goat, as loud as a goat, as grumpy as a goat, as quick and jumpy and frisky and soft and woolly and horny and taily as a goat, until the world itself seems to be a goat made up of countless other goats and watched over by some enormous all-seeing goat who created all this goating in its image.
I just love that. I love the whole goat thing, you know. And I think by the end, you know, the Seder has 4 cups of wine. I think you're ready for a little humor by the end of the...
Well, the kids don't, presumably, but...
No. All people, even children, are supposed to drink wine.
4 cups?
4 cups.
It would literally kill my kid.
I just have to tell you that when we were kids...
Maybe tiny.
My grandfather got little tiny cups, and he used Maxwell House. In fact, he did the Maxwell House so fast that one year we heard him go, and all of a sudden we heard, Master not allows it, and he said, wait, that's our part. He said, all right, do it fast. And then we got to go. But we all got little cups. So, you know, if you have little kids, little cups, it will make the Seder go a little faster.
Until they start vomiting. And, yeah.
That's right. It won't kill your kid. You know, that's how we...
I don't know.
Nowhere it says in the Mishnah that you have to buy wine for everybody. If they can't afford it, you have to buy wine. It's one of the few times when you're buying wine for people that don't have wine as opposed to taking the wine away from them. So.
Right.
something like that. You, in your very beautiful but short introduction, you say the Seder is called the Book of Living Memory. Here we are embarking on an ancient, perennial attempt to give human life, our lives, dignity. So I thought maybe just ask you one final question, then we'll throw it open to all of you about dignity. What is the aspect of dignity that you think about that you would put in the introduction?
Well, I think it can take a couple of different forms. One is the dignity of freedom, like the recognition of the ways in which we continue to be slaves. You know, I was speaking earlier about Jews of my generation and a particular kind of laughter. It is a laughter that lacks dignity. You know, the like falling in love, being drunken on these ersatz images of ourselves in pop culture, believing that that's who we are and that's what we should pat ourselves on the back for, and getting excited about it. That lacks dignity. All slavery lacks dignity. And so this perpetual movement toward freedom, which the Haggadah invites us or compels us to participate in, is a movement toward human dignity. Also, I would say the challenge that's put forth. The Haggadah is nothing but, if not an aspirational book, and an optimistic book, a book that envisions something better or wants something better, that questions what's wrong with the present and how we can urge this moment toward a better moment. And that is like the most dignified adventure that a human can go on. Wanting to participate in the repair of the world. That it's not a coincidence that Gandhi and Martin Luther King and just about every social justice movement of the 20th century has borrowed from or appealed to the story of the Exodus. It is a story about wanting to be better as individuals, as a family, and as a people, and as a planet.
I appreciate it. Maybe good time to open it up for questions, please.
You speak about the Haggadah in very humanistic terms, in terms of dignity and freedom. Not necessarily universal. This is a Jewish experience. I'd be curious to hear you speak about the religious growth and the religious aspect and how it may have changed through the process, and your interest in ritual, how that may have changed. Thank you.
Well, really, you should keep the mic, because this is going to have to be a conversation.
Oh boy.
What do you mean by religious? People often ask me if I am religious, and my best answer is I'm agnostic, not about God, but about your question. Like, what do you mean? So much of this is a question of terminology. Like, is it religious to be sitting at a table? Is it spiritual to be sitting at a table telling a 3,000-year-old story at the same time that millions of other Jews are telling the same story?
So, okay, so to elaborate, the quality of the story is certainly powerful, and it inspires certain thoughts and feelings if done properly. But the experience is, you're a Jew doing a Haggadah. There are other ancient texts that are valuable to other cultures. There are experiences that we all share, from the Super Bowl to the State of the Union to, all over the place. Just because you're doing something at the same time everyone else is doesn't make it religious. Or doing it all with the Maxwell House, muttering through it doesn't make it religious.
Right.
So in terms of, I'm a Jew and this has value beyond one which is tribal, because we do it because Jews do it and Jews have done it and we're going to keep doing it. A value which has sort of enriching beyond perhaps what we can see. In other words, dignity is unarguably good. Do we have to devote a night to freedom over slavery, to being against oppression, or do we do it because frankly the Bible says so? So, sort of, where do you stand on that? How did that inform? Is this something which is this tribal for you, or is this something which is moving on a deeper level?
Well, I mean, tribal is a deep level, but to me, religion doesn't really do anything that can't be found in secular life. It just isn't found in secular life. So, you know, is there anybody who wouldn't like to turn off his or her phone for a night? Is there anybody who wouldn't like to get away from email? Anybody who wouldn't like to have dinner with, you know, his or her family over the course of a couple hours and catch up? Everybody wants that. Everybody craves that. But there are very few people who don't observe Shabbat that have that. And the Seder similarly provokes an event that is possible without the structure of religion and possible without God, but very, very rarely happens. And I've become increasingly interested in what the structure, I mean, Seder means order, you know, what order can provide. So the two things that most intrigue me about religion are how it encourages one to take stock, you know, to pause and reflect on what we have and who we are and who we want to be. You know, the most fundamental human activity that is the easiest not to have. And then what Abraham Joshua Heschel called radical amazement, engaging with our sense of wonder. And I think that's what I was getting at when I spoke about you know, millions of Jews telling the same story. I didn't simply mean anthropologically it's inspiring or tribally it makes one feel good, but it's radically amazing in the same way that standing before the ocean before a storm is radically amazing, or having a child is radically amazing. And I think that is something, it is a way of being that is so primary to our humanity and so important to us. And almost everything in life encourages the concealment of it. And you know, setting aside a time and a place to invest oneself in it has become very important to me. Just being available to the experience, you know, coming with sincerity and earnestness. I don't know if it's in the Shechian or it's in the Kiddush when the translation is, here I am present and ardent, prepared to fulfill the mitzvah of the first cup. And that notion of being present and ardent, you know, that is what's necessary to arrive with, not belief in God, not skepticism, not a particular, you know, history of observance, not a particular any particular familiarity with the text, but to be present and ardent, you know, to be there, to be available to it, and to be earnest and enthusiastic about it.
You translate the name of God, Lord God of us, King of the cosmos. Wanna?
I actually, Nathan is really the person who would be able to.
We have you, so.
No, I'm second best for this answer. You know, he really. I'm going to feel like I'm speaking on his behalf in a way that I'm not sure.
Don't speak on his behalf. What does it mean to you? God of us, King of the cosmos.
For one thing, I think the simple fact that it's not the most familiar way of saying it is good. You know, that it gives old language new meaning, new resonance. Our God is something that we just pass over. It truly, I think, has come to mean zero. And God of us, you know, requires a moment of pause. And maybe, look, in a way, the answer is that you just asked that question. You know, it invites a question, it invites thought. Nathan didn't go out of it, didn't obscure language in order to raise questions, but it is an advantage of his way of having done it. This particular choice.
I think one more question, and then because otherwise we won't get any books signed.
So, you said early on that writing has informed you so much about your writing, and you know, there's two things in your writing that's always affected me. One of the two things in your writing, you know, the voices and the mixing up of the voices, and then the way you tend to reach this amazing conclusion within irresolution are extraordinary. And it seems to me that the Seder has always been a backward-looking thing, and you're trying to push this to being a forward-looking thing. And, if you believe that art and religion are both what's truth a little bit, that you're trying to... So how intentional was the desire to push this forward-looking? And also, what did you learn as a writer in doing it?
I don't think of the Haggadah as being backward-looking. I mean, what is the most important sentence in the Haggadah? Most people would say next year in Jerusalem. It's, in a way, the most forward-looking sentence in all of religion. I did not work on this to make something new, or to make something, despite its title, or to make something forward-looking. The only agenda really was to, as the analogy I used earlier was to tune the instrument so that it's more easy to sing along to. So the tunes are more familiar, recognizable, so that they're in our key, the key of our singing voice. And sometimes that is simply making it clear. Sometimes it is contextualizing the story so that we have a kind of appreciation, so that we know that we are, playing a piano and not a harpsichord. And sometimes it is making it invigorating, either through beauty or through provocation, so that we want to stay with it. Unfortunately, most people's experience of moving through a Haggadah is, okay, let's skip from 14 to 27. Everybody knows what that is. Like just moving through the prime numbers, basically, as opposed to wanting to linger. What if you could have a book where you wanted to linger on the pages rather than like kind of peek ahead to see how far you are from the meal? I don't know if anybody's read David Mamet's essay, I believe it's called On Decorating a Jewish House. But the point he makes, very provocatively, is that we don't have a lot of Jewish artifacts that we can be proud of, physical objects, ways to identify ourselves as Jews in our homes. So what do we have? People have like Chagall lithographs. People have a mezuzah they picked up in Israel, Jerusalem stone. But what about something that is simultaneously and unapologetically Jewish and contemporary? Something that, one of the things that really attracted me about this project was not only making a Haggadah that was good by the standards I used to judge my favorite novels or political writing or art in art galleries, but something more generally something Jewish that aspired to those standards. And I gave a lot of thought to what the book would look like on a coffee table. A Haggadah is a book that's on a bookshelf and it's on a Seder table, but it's actually also on coffee tables, hopefully. And that's a nice thing. I mean, when I was in college, there was nothing Jewish that I would have displayed in my room. There just wasn't. I wasn't ashamed of being Jewish. I was, in fact, very proud of being Jewish. I did all kinds of Jewish things. But I didn't have artifacts that reflected my Jewish identity. And so I think that there's something very important in it being an object of quality, that's nicely made, that looks nice, and frankly that we don't want to spill wine on. So, whether that's forward-looking or not, I don't really know. I think of it as like trying to create an experience that people are entirely present for.
Well, I want to thank you. I want to say to you that, just one second, I want to say that the first book of yours that I read was Everything is Illuminated, and it's a great adventure. And in some ways, I think it's an adventure back in order to move forward, and I feel this is the same. It's an adventure. And I think even listening to your taking us through how you came about thinking about this is also a nice little piece of an adventure, and so I want to thank you. And now, thank you.
Thank you.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM. To GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.